So Mike, thank you for joining us this morning for this oral history. I'm going to welcome you to introduce yourself and to start maybe by talking about your childhood or background here in Goshen.
Well, thank you. I'm Mike Puro. I grew up here in Goshen. Father was a local public accountant. My mother was a choir director, pianist, organist at the First Brethren Church here in town. Went to Parkside grade school, same place where my mother went, my two brothers, and my two sons. So we have an affinity with Parkside grade school. Grew up on Garfield, which for folks is about 2 blocks from the mill race in Shanklin Park. Spent a lot of time there as a child. Graduated from Goshen High School, 67, went to Purdue University. I later went to IUSB, got a master's degree in business. Along the way, got married. Lori Tweedale is my wife. We have 2 sons. Eric, the oldest, now lives in Finland with our granddaughter. And my youngest son, Matt, lives in town with his wife, Erin. Probably the reason that you're interviewing me today is that along the way I became the mayor of the city of Goshen.
Well, we'll have plenty of time to address some of the themes both for you as a mayor and also for you as a resident and somebody that grew up and chose to stay around here in Goshen. Back to the neighborhood that you grew up in, what was that like growing up for you here in Goshen?
Yeah, well, that was the 1950s. Things were a lot different back then. The town was a lot smaller. In the neighborhood, in the summertime, you'd have breakfast, you'd get out the door as fast as you could. There were a lot of kids that lived in the neighborhood, and we played until some of the parents blew a whistle. Some of them just yelled out the door that it was noon and we were supposed to come home to eat. And as soon as we ate, we were right back out there and kept at it until basically it would get dark. Back then, there weren't a lot of boundaries. We had certain areas we had to stay within, couldn't cross Main Street, big street like that. I wasn't supposed to be down at the mill race, so of course I went there all the time. But the neighbors would look out. If they saw you doing something you shouldn't be doing, you either got disciplined by them or they'd call your parents. And there were a lot of eyes out there and watching over kids. So, we had a lot more freedom, fortunately, than kids do today.
Did you have any favorite activities around the neighborhood that you recall?
Yes, it was mostly boys that lived in the neighborhood. And we organized, particularly, I remember the football leagues. We actually would have a football team from our neighborhood, and we would play other neighborhoods in football, mostly down at the little park on Wilson Street, sometimes over at Shanklin. Wilson Street also had a baseball diamond, so there was a lot of baseball being played down there, broke a lot of windows in the neighborhood houses. It was a small field. A lot of it was generated on sports. One of the fathers organized an Olympic event one year during the Olympics, and we just had any number of things, including a bicycle race down at Shanklin Park. And in addition to that, one of the really fun things clear out through high school was Shanklin Park had a parks program during the summertime. There would always be a Goshen High School, usually a senior boy and a senior girl that would have programs and stuff down there. And then there was also just games to play that you could play with, just pick up Monopoly or something and play other people.
And did you have any activities around the mill race itself? Or did you say you were discouraged?
Well, I was not supposed to. The mill race would run very, very fast back then. It was still being used to generate electricity, and it could. The reason that the flow is not too fast anymore is because the banks aren't as secure as they were back then. So that thing really flowed fast, and it was very, very deep. There's a lot of sediment in there now, and but it was, you fell in, you were going to be in trouble. And so yeah, I wasn't supposed to walk to Parkside along the mill race, and as any young boy tends to do, whatever you're not supposed to do, that's what we did.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about the mill race as we go forward, because it seems to have changed a lot in terms of its accessibility then since the way it was.
Certainly, yes. Back then, NIPSCO would run a car up and down and do inspections on the bank. If you tried to drive a car through there now, I think half the bank would collapse.
Well, so you grew up and went to school here. You chose to go elsewhere for college. What brought you back to Goshen?
Well, simply put, when I graduated from Purdue University, there was a bit of a recession going on. There weren't a lot of jobs for people with business degrees, and I had gone through a lot of applications at Purdue, did not have a job, so I came back to Goshen. I had virtually zero money, tapped out the resources. I paid most of my own way through college, so toward the end, I bought, I think it was 20 boxes of macaroni and cheese, and I got one of those a day to get through the last month. So there wasn't a lot of choices. I mean, I had to come back to Goshen. Lived with my parents for a while, worked at Goshen Rubber Company just as a laborer. I was a member of the United Rubber Workers Union. Did that for several months in order to get enough money to get my own apartment, and then ended up with a management job at Goshen Rubber.
So that provided some of the background for you being in a position to step into politics here in the community, but that started early on.
Yes. When the Kennedy-Nixon election happened, I was just enthralled by that whole process. I was a sixth grader. Kennedy was this young man, didn't look like any of the politicians you'd seen on TV. They were all old and they were all male. Kennedy obviously was male too, but it was old white men that were running the show, and here's a younger fellow that really excited a lot of people. And I watched both the Democrat and Republican convention. They used to cover those gavel to gavel. They were very long TV programs. But the thing that sort of cemented that is I had a sixth grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Judkins. She had a mock election in our classroom, and there were students that did the jobs that were done at the precincts at that time. There were Democrat inspectors, judges, clerks, and sheriffs, and those are the people that would check records, make sure that you were eligible to vote. I knew enough back then that my chances, and I wanted to be one of those people, so we had to put our names forward, and I put my name forward for a Democrat side because I knew most of the kids' parents in that class were Republicans. So I ended up being the Democrat judge for that mock election. The day before, teacher came up and said, now our principal, Park Lance, is going to come in and he's going to want to vote. And this is for children only, the kids here, the students only, to vote. So you need to tell Mr. Lance that he can't vote here, and because he can't vote here, and he needs to leave the room. And that was a scary thing, because back then you didn't talk to the principal. The principal sat in an office, and if you ever met him, it was for something that you did that was bad. But he was in on it, obviously. I didn't know that, but he came in, and I had to explain to him, and he thanked me and left. But made quite an impression on me. And actually ran into that. Well, I had somehow found her address. She had when she retired, she ended up in a retirement home in Fort Wayne. We exchanged Christmas cards, and I was able to go over one time and see and talk to her. At that point in time, I'd already been mayor, and she wanted to know why I hadn't pushed that and run for higher office. So she was a teacher. It's the kind of thing teachers do.
Were there other people you remember that had a particularly strong influence on you here in Goshen?
Well, my father, who was an accountant, I can remember him saying one time that a neighbor, he did taxes for any number of people in town, but this was a neighbor, and the neighbor brought in all of his W-2s and everything else you need for your taxes, and Dad asked him, now, is that everything? And he goes, yes, it is. He said, well, I happen to know that you run a lawnmower business, a lawn mowing business, and you do that pretty extensively during the summer, so we need to count that as income. And the fellow said, well, that's cash. We'll just do that off the books. And he goes, that my father said, that's fine, but you won't have your taxes done by me, and asked the guy, to leave. And those kind of stories, there's others, the First Brethren Church through the Sunday school programs, this, that, and other. Those kinds of things would stick with you. Favorite teacher in high school was Mr. Blosser. Everybody loved him. Because his son was in my class, we ended up getting him for 4 straight years as a teacher, which nobody else would get to do. Excellent, excellent teacher, and really loved mathematics. I actually was a mathematics major for 1 year.
Were there other kind of values that you remember being formed at that point in your life through your home or through the church life or from the community itself?
Well, from the political standpoint, there were statesmen, what we would call statesmen back then, were elected officials, and which I'd be hard-pressed to say that we have those individuals now. Those are individuals who thought of their country, number one, thought of their own constituents and the rest of the people that lived in the United States. That was their major concern, and the political concern was way, way down the list. Everett Dirksen was a senator from Illinois, was one. Lindsay from New York. There were just many of those kinds of people back then. And politics was a very honorable profession back then. It was something to strive for, and I always wanted to do something. Well, to go back to John F. Kennedy, he made the famous statement when he was inaugurated, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And it really stuck with me, and I'm thinking of the kinds of things that I could be doing, become a doctor, this, that, and the other. And none of those appealed to me as much as being able to be involved in politics and to be able to affect people's lives in a positive manner.
So what were some of the other things then that brought you into politics, some of the early roles or activities you would have been involved in?
Sure. Well, Alan Kaufman, who was mayor after myself, and I, we knew each other from 7th grade on. And in high school, we took a trip with the young Democrats here in Elkhart County, a bus trip down to Indianapolis to see Lyndon Johnson, who was president at that time, running for re-election, and gave a speech, an outdoor speech. Just thousands upon thousands of people were there. I vividly remember he would always wear a Stetson cowboy hat. At the end of his speech, he'd take that off and toss it in the crowd, and that thing must have got ripped into 400 pieces by the crowd trying to get a piece. Very, very popular at the time. Of course, if you know anything about Lyndon Johnson, he ended up getting out of the race and, over the Vietnam War. But it sort of drew attention to both Alan and myself, some of the older, and again, it was all men back then, but older Democrat men in Goshen invited us to a meeting where they were doing some strategy stuff, and they had recognized that both of us had an interest in politics, and they were going to start, trying to bring along a new generation of people in town that were interested in running for office.
So you had come back to Goshen somewhat out of necessity, but yet it was home, and is that the opportunities to be involved in local politics? Was that part of what kept you here, or?
Well, sure. If you're interested in running for politics, you lose your complete base by moving. Let's say I had gone to California. You start from scratch. Nobody knows you there, have no friends. You've got to work up all of that kind of of background. You've got to be very, very active in politics there and start to work from scratch. Here, I was known in town. Puro isn't the most common name in Goshen. It's not the most common name in Indiana. So people would instantly connect me to my parents. All the schoolmates, I had worked here. It was a natural place to stay. And plus, I really love this community. This community has been looked after and tended by generations of people to try to make this, a better community to live in. And so this is the place that I decided I'm going to try and see if I can have a political career.
So what were some of the other kind of milestones or stepping stones on your way to mayor?
Well, I had been the Democratic County Chairman for 2 years. I'd also been the president of the Young Democrats Club, both here in Elkhart County, and we were in the 3rd Congressional District at the time. So all of those roles, I was learning, meeting a lot of people around the state that were involved in politics. In 1982, I ran for state representative against Phil Warner. Phil Warner was a Goshen, lived on the outskirts of town, had a farm, had been, I believe, in the House of Representatives for 20-some years. I ran against him with the thought of learning how to run a campaign, get more name recognition out there, had no illusions that I would be able to win that contest, and lo and behold, on election night I won. The election board, however, that was the first votes that were out, and the media acknowledged that I won. They were still looking at the results because there was a problem. There just weren't enough votes cast in our race. They were comparing it to other ones, and they said there's a massive fall off. And they finally found it was the first year that the county had used the punch card system. And it was programmed incorrectly, and my opponent was not getting all the votes that he deserved. A good portion of his votes were on a different parameter, and they just escaped, and then we weren't picked up. So I ended up losing that race, but we had a recount to make sure that there weren't any other errors in that program. During that process, a lot of articles in the Goshen News and whatever, and my name recognition soared, and I thought, well, if you're going to politics, you better find out if you have any aptitude or if you're electable. I had a business background, so I ran for clerk treasurer in the city election the next year and was able to win that. So that sort of set the stage then, with 4 years of experience in city government, to be able to run for mayor.
So who was in office while you were the clerk treasurer?
Max Chittister was serving his 2nd term as mayor when I came in. Max Chittister was a Republican, didn't particularly like Democrats. We had a few words in the first several months that we were there, and an understanding, and part of it was myself learning what the clerk treasurer's role was. But over time, I was able to work a lot more on the budget, understood budgeting. There is a major role for the clerk treasurer to do budgeting. Mayor Chittister, however, had to do an awful lot of that himself, or took that upon himself for whatever reason the prior 4 years. When I started giving him the information that he needed to finish off the budget, he soon realized that a good portion of this was going to be lifted off his shoulders. And Max was an avid golfer, got himself out and golfed a lot that summer. And after that, we had a very cordial relationship.
So what was some of the broader political context here in Goshen then, as far as preceding Max Chittister, and what that mayoral history had been leading up to the point where you became clerk treasurer?
Yeah, people were under the assumption that this is a Republican town. That was certainly the county elected mostly Republicans. There were Democrats being elected back then, but it was mostly Republicans in the county offices. Goshen had had a three-term Republican mayor, Ralph Schenck, and the council during that time was predominantly, if not completely, Republican. So during those 3 terms, that's when Goshen got this reputation of being a Republican community. However, going clear back into the late 1940s, it had been a Democrat mayor, succeeded by a Republican, succeeded by a Democrat. It went back and forth for years and years and years. And that's exactly what happened when Ralph Schenck decided he wouldn't run for his 4th term. And that's when Steve Chiswick, a Democrat, came in. Steve Chiswick had 1 term and was succeeded by Max Chittister. So that kept on. That was from the late 1940s clear through the 1970s.
So how did you perceive then the transition ahead of you, and Max Chittister, how did it go from his mayorship to you deciding to run for mayor or becoming mayor?
Well, he had decided that he was not going to run again after 2 terms, and so it was going to be an open seat. And at that point in time, I felt that the 4 years background I had handling the city's finances was an excellent background to come in and step. I felt confident that I could handle the job as mayor. So I ran that year. Larry Sarver was the police chief, and he ran as the Republican. And I was fortunate enough to win that election.
And how was that? What were some other things that were happening in Goshen at that time that were significant, or that may have that you may have inherited then coming into the office as mayor?
Well, and I ran on this as one of the issues. The streets in Goshen were in fairly bad shape at the time. I talked about the fact that I would find money within the budget to start doing some dramatic improvements in the road system. And in local politics, there is nothing that residents want more than just a public transportation system that works. If they're driving down and it wasn't so much maybe traffic jams, we see some of those in town now, but it was just the lousy condition of the road. And they're just reminded every time they hit that pothole that something isn't being done right. Not casting aspersions on Max Chittister's administration, but it was something that needed to be done. I ran on that. It was just an easy thing for them to understand. And then I had to actually do something about that. And we did. We found money within the budget, made it a priority, got the streets back in shape, more importantly, got a maintenance program going on so that we would keep the roads in good shape. And then soon after that, we had an assistant engineer that started to work to wring out all the improvements we could in our system, because we were working with the same streets that were maybe back in the 1940s. So we started looking at one-way streets, left turn lanes, anything that was fairly inexpensive that could help move traffic in town. And we wrung every efficiency we could out of the current system up to the point in time where we had to start doing some major projects, the 3rd Street project being one that started under my administration, was finished under Alan Kaufman's.
I know transportation brings up a number of themes that I think we'll probably touch on here, but just to kind of fill in the timeline a little bit, what year were you elected mayor, and then when did you finally leave office?
I was elected in 1987, took office in 88, and in 1997 I took a position. I was the general manager of the Indiana Toll Road. So okay. In the midst of my 3rd term was when I left.
So going back to you coming into office, what were some of the other dynamics or other things that affected your ability to lead the community forward?
Sure. Very quickly, within a month of my taking office, Bud Beller, who was the Chamber of Commerce president at the time, asked if we could get together and meet. And he explained to me something I was completely unaware of, and I don't think a lot of people in the community were aware of. But back when he came in as chamber president, and this was under Ralph Schenck was as mayor, they made an agreement that the Chamber of Commerce would do all of the outreach to try to find companies to come to build here and provide jobs in Goshen. And that would be their responsibility, not the city's. And in many communities, the city mayor will be out there doing that too. And it's in competition at times with the chamber because you've got egos on both sides and people wanting to take credit, and it doesn't do the community any good to have that kind of friction between those two groups. So, and Ralph Schenck agreed to this, and on the chamber's part, they said, what we'll do is we will not push the city to do any tax abatement so that you're getting the full tax load from these new companies and can use those to have the best infrastructure that you can have so that the roads are in good shape. The water and sewer department is, those things can handle more industry coming in, and that the rates aren't terribly high, and that the parks are nice so that people that come here to live and work in these factories will have a place to go with their children. And it made just a tremendous amount of sense. There's a lot to do as mayor, and not to be out there trying to get companies to come into Goshen was almost a relief. So that was a handshake agreement under Ralph Schenck. Bud Beller was still there when Steve Chiswick came into office. The same handshake was made. When Bud Beller was still there when Max Schitter came into office. The same agreement was made, and I made the same agreement with him. And it really worked well for Goshen. In fact, I talked to other mayors. Mayors get together a couple times a year just to sit around and talk about all their problems, and usually there's another mayor that's seen that and has a solution, and we change information back and forth. And I was talking once. In fact, I brought Bud Beller with me. We could bring guests to those meetings, and I brought Bud Beller with me to one of those meetings, and mayors were upset with me, and what do you have a chamber president here for? And I said, don't you get along with your chamber president? And to a person, they said, no. We fight with the chamber all the time, and that did not make any difference. Republican, Democrat mayor, they had a bad relation with their chamber president. And so this was very, very unique with Goshen, and it served Goshen very, very well, I think. And that continued. Sam Willits came in as the chamber president after that, and I explained that to him, and I've also wrote a little bit up and I gave it to the current chamber president. I don't know the situation. I don't stick my nose into local politics to a great degree anymore, but at least the current chamber president knows that the history of what's happened here in Goshen.
So in the context that provided you to help lead the community forward, what were some of the particular strategies or particular ways that you viewed or that with how you approached some of the improvements to the streets and working with the various departments that allowed you to be successful during your terms?
Well, sure. A lot of things, at least through my life, have happened by accident and had really wonderful outcomes. We had a fire station on the north side of town. It's on Middlebury Street. And it was very much needed because for years, decades, we had no overpass. So the central fire station, if there was a train coming through, had no way to get to the north side. But by the time I came into office, that overpass was there, and those two fire stations were not that far apart. Plus, the maintenance on that fire station on Middlebury Street had just been, they'd allowed it to deteriorate. And when I came in, the best use of that building was to take those, the equipment and the personnel, move them to Central and close that station. And there was an uproar there. That's on the north side where was predominantly Democrat at the time. There were Democrats up there that didn't talk to me for years and years and years after that because they saw that as the only presence of government on the north side. It was closed. We had some people that were upset. Very, very fortunately, Dr. Gingrich comes back to town. He's looking to set up a clinic. This building looks to be something that would work perfectly for him. We had several meetings. I think we were able to help find some funding, some grant money for him to renovate that. I think we charged $1 a year for rent, for a lease. And he was able to set that up. And a facility, the fire station that you only needed in an emergency, became a clinic where people were getting help on a day-to-day basis, which was very, very much needed. After that experience, there were a couple of Republicans that bumped into me, and they said, we were really worried about you, and you became mayor, that you were going to be, it's all Democrat, 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 and that you would be playing favors to certain people. And after we saw that, what you had done there on the fire station, we're sure you're going to play it fair for both sides. And that certainly was I was lucky to that situation that transpired, but that certainly was my attitude going in. We have Republicans and Democrats on election day. After that, in this community, people come together and the elected officials work for the betterment of this community, and we set politics aside. That's another strength of Goshen. You don't see that in some communities. All you do is read in the paper. Well, you can see what happens with the Senate and the House of Representatives now, the national government. There's no way that those people are working together. And it's a shame. It's to the detriment of our nation. Here, people work together, and it's positive for our community.
So did you feel you had the space to look beyond just a 4-year term in terms of the direction you were trying to help steer things and the work you were trying to get done?
Well, sure. One of the problems with elected government is that there's a 4-year horizon. People, they run for office, they say they're going to do X, they get into office, hopefully they are able to do X, and then they're on to the next, if they run again, it's the next 4 increment. There's nobody that's looking out, in many instances, way out into the future. And if you're not doing that, you're going to have problems. We saw that pretty immediately. We needed to get a new fire truck, and I said, well, what do we have saved up for this, and how long has it been planned for? And they go, well, it's falling apart. And well, I understand that hook and ladder truck's falling apart, but what's your plan for replacement of your major capital items, your fire trucks, your ambulances? Well, we don't really do that. When something starts to go bad, we start looking for money. Well, that's no way to run a business, and government truly is a business. You've got to plan for those things. Those are huge expenditures. I would guess in today's dollars, a new fire truck is in excess of $250,000. You can't drop that into a budget given 6-month notice. So all the departments had to start developing a capital budget. The large items, when they're going to need to be replaced, and we started setting aside funds and whatever to do that sort of thing. And in the process of that, the departments were all asked, what do you want your department to look like 10 years down the road? Many of them go, oh, I don't know, I've got stuff to do today. And I said, well, if you're not looking to see what the police department's going to look like 10 years from now, who is? Because it certainly isn't going to be the mayor. You don't want the mayor sticking their nose that deeply into an organization. You want to be telling the mayor, this is the kinds of things, and rationalize that and get the mayor to buy in, or keep asking questions and saying, no, we can't do that. Department heads felt that they didn't have the time to do that, and that happened around the same time I instituted it's called Total Quality Management, but it's basically giving the authority to people to make decisions. The people, those firemen know a lot about what's happening and what equipment is needed and what changes could be, and oftentimes they're still closer to that, and the fire chief is maybe removed from that or so busy doing paperwork. So the idea is to push responsibility down so that the assistant chiefs and the officers below that started taking more responsibility, while the fire chief looked out into the future. And it really, really worked in the instance of the Reliance Fire Station. That was the rank and file firefighters said, we want to be a part of planning this. We know best what a firehouse needs to look like. And those folks live there 24/7, or at least, 24 hours. And wherever their shift is, I believe it's 5 or 6 days. So they did, they helped design it. Most of them all have tremendous construction capabilities. They run little one-man operations as plumbers and electricians and this and that. They offered their time to come in and do a lot of the work to keep the dollar amount down if we would take those dollars they saved and put into additional equipment that we otherwise couldn't afford. When that project was done, the pride that was shown by those firefighters was just unbelievable, to the point that the firefighters were all male then, I believe they still are, but they realized that at some point in time there's going to be a female firefighter in Goshen, and they had a restroom and a separate portion in the dormitory area that would accommodate a female, and that was huge coming from that group. When they opened that, there were retired firefighters that came from I don't know how far to come and see that operation, and the biggest smiles on their face, including a fellow that I went to school with who firefighting, he tangled with Mayor Chiswick over the length of his hair back in the 1970s. Hair length on men was a big deal. And he never got over it. He was upset. My goodness, I couldn't get 3 words out of him. When we opened that fire station, I couldn't get him to stop talking. He was so thankful and happy of what happened. And that's the kind of thing that can happen in government. Very, very positive kinds of things for our community.
Are there other examples that come to mind where you kind of distributed leadership or created opportunities for other people to lead in ways they hadn't before?
Well, it basically happened in every single department. Some departments took it to heart more than others. The consultant that came in told me, he said, now you're going to have to sit back, and you can't be interfering and wanting to know everything that's going on, because then you're in this leadership role where you've got to be hands-on, and this doesn't work. This is not a hands-on type of leadership. He said, what's going to happen here is that you became mayor, and partly because you're a good problem solver. And so every time here comes a problem, boy, you want to dive in, you want to help, and you want to put your stamp on it. Not so much credit type of thing, but just to get the best possible result that we could. He said, but you need to understand that if you're going to be involved in every single one of these things, maybe 10 things could get done in a 3-month period with you involved. If you step back and get out, so you aren't going to believe, you're going to have 15 or 16 things, major things that happen, and you're going to sit there and go, my goodness, if they'd have just asked me, I could have told them, do this too, and it'll make it that much better. He said, what would you rather have, 16, 17, 18 projects that are 95% as good as you could do, or you get involved in them and now you're down to 10 and you've added that little 5%. And I saw what he was saying. I learned to do problem solving. We were in the process of teaching people. They were learning themselves. And the morale and attitudes change dramatically in those departments where they took it to heart. Didn't happen every place. But so I would sit in my office and I had free time. Time for me to look out into the future and do the kinds of things that maybe mayors ought to do. It was very, very uneasy for several. In fact, things were happening that I didn't find out until they were already implemented, and it took all I could do to not go down and say, look, I may not be involved, but you've got to start letting me know when these things happen. It's a very, very good process.
And so I know there's probably examples of that, like you said, throughout all the departments. But again, transportation was something that you focused on, particularly with the streets, with public transportation, with bike trails. What were some of the things that were most prominent then for you, as far as thinking about where there were outcomes that you were proud to have had some influence on?
Sure. Well, there was nationwide, there was a big push to take abandoned railroad lines and turn them into bicycle paths. It was called the Rails to Trails program. And that was basically county type of things. They were multi-county. Shipshewana Trail is a perfect example of that, the Pumpkin Vine. But there were some communities that were starting to do some bicycle paths within their communities, and I had been reading about that. Went to see the park superintendent to talk to him about this issue, and he smiled and reached over into his desk and pulled out a file where Mr. Kosnoff and there were several Kosnoffs in Goshen at the time. I can't remember his first name, but he was on the park board at one time. And he envisioned a bike path that went down the mill race and would circle around to what was the old Goshen Junior High School there on Indiana Avenue, and then hook back up at the dam. And so I took that and started talking with some folks, and we came up with an idea of doing a major bike path within the city of Goshen. We had no funding, but this was part of that looking out into the future, doing some planning. And perhaps we would be successful in having this come to fruition if we could find funding. A local businessman, Bill Johnson, who ran and owned Goshen Rubber Company, put up some money for a consultant to come in. And we ended up with a plan that ran down the mill race and used 8th Street as the circle. To come back, and then the idea was to, as time would go by, we would connect it to all the schools and downtown and Goshen College and all the parks within the community. So we have this, it's sitting on the shelf, we have no money, and lo and behold, that was the year that the federal government passed the ICE-T Act. ICE-T allowed for required that 10 or 15% of all funding on transportation be used for alternate transportation projects like bike paths. So here's the money available. We've got the plan. The MACOG is the local agency, the regional agency that handles federal funds. And we were able immediately to get a grant and get that first portion started. MACOG helped us. They found other it's called CMAQ money, Congestion Mitigation for Air Quality Funds. We unfortunately had pollution problems in Elkhart County, caused mostly by the paint booths and the RV industries. But that brought with it some money, and if we were able to get people on the bikes and walking instead of on their cars, that was a legitimate use. So the money just started coming in, and because we had the plan, they just kept funding us and funding us, to the point that by the time I left office, there were more miles of bike path in Goshen, Indiana than in Indianapolis.
So there were some real benefits to being ahead of the curve in that respect. Was there pushback or was there resistance?
Oh, there was pushback. Oh, yeah. Some of the most prominent supporters of the bike path system now were not at the time. And unfortunately, it was during it was during a mayor's election. Visions of grandeur from the former mayor. It was during a mayor's election. So, as can happen at times, if an elected official is putting forth a program, the person running against feels they have to fight it. But universally, once it was in, it was seen to be a positive thing. The process we went through to find a consultant to do the actual design work is that I walked, there were 3 or 4 companies that wanted to do that. I walked them down the mill race. Wanted to make sure they knew what this was, talked to them about the history, what we wanted to see here, what we wanted to accomplish, and ask how they could do that. The engineering firms had never done bike paths before, and they were very much into how deep the asphalt needed to be and how wide it had to be and this, that, and very technical. We also had a landscape architect firm that came in, and he was talking about the amenities that we could have with this. And let's not, he said, would you be willing not to use asphalt or concrete? He said, we can use a really fine grade of limestone that will pack itself, that'll give you a very country feel. It'll be a feeling that is more conducive to people, because we knew people would walk this in addition to bike it. Bikes can use it. It's a good surface. And we did that, and it feels better. If you can envision walking down that or riding your bike down that, if that had been made out of asphalt on a 85-degree day in August and the heat that would be generated, it just wouldn't be the same thing. So, and he got the job, absolutely got the job. As we got down toward the tail end of the project, and it's being finished, he said, you know, down here where the trail is meeting the downtown, he said, this is going to be an economic development project. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's going to be businesses that come because of this trail. And I said, well, we're in it for the recreation. If there's something like that that can happen, that certainly is icing on the cake. And I walked away going, well, I don't see how a trail could do this. Well, a trail did that. And it's become quite a positive thing in our community, as now you see the Hawks building that's been developed there. I'm not so sure that would have been that attractive had we not had, the bike path there. There was an old plumbing and heating company that was just a very, very old building, and they had trash in the back, just a real eyesore. That all got cleaned up. The federal, Interra credit union came in and did a massive improvement on that corner with their building. So, and I'll tell you now, people want to live along these trails too. It's actually I believe, it helps property values for those homes that are sitting alongside this trail.
So I don't know how much it ties into your some of the redevelopment that happened as mayor, and how much happened as you were then the redevelopment director for the city afterwards. But what are some of the other aspects of the redevelopment along the mill race that really stood out to you, or that were you most appreciated being involved in?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I did come back after the toll road, came back and served Alan Kaufman as redevelopment director for 2 years. I was the first redevelopment director that the city had. And the focus had already been on that mill race corridor to improve that. There were some very, very old, decrepit factory buildings that some of which couldn't be saved. The Hawks building is one that certainly, that thing is built like a bunker. I think you could drop a bomb on the top of that thing and it would be fine. It certainly needed a lot of work, but it was worth saving. That was the Barler building when I grew up. My uncle was the treasurer of the Barler Company. So that was the first factory that I'd ever been in, learned things like don't stare at the welders because that bright light's going to do bad things to your eyes. And, so that experience of being in that building and my uncle being there really helped in the process of the city owning that property. There was a man who used a portion of that. He owned the whole area, but he was just using a portion of that building anymore for a concrete company that he had. And the city had tangled with him in the past. We had found out that he was using water from a fire hydrant to do some of his concrete mixing. And of course that wasn't metered, so he was getting his water for free. And we politely asked him to quit, and he certainly did, but it wasn't a really nice situation. So here, and he doesn't want to sell to the city. No, I just don't want to. And now I show up. so knew him a little bit, and asked him if I could actually see. I said, I've never seen what it looks like inside. We took a little bit of a walk, and I explained to him about my uncle. Lo and behold, he knew my uncle extremely well. My uncle was Spotty Gill. There's people in town. Everybody loves Spotty Gill. He really liked Spotty, and we started to have a discussion. We got pretty much that to terms that he would start the process with us, and he would sell us the building. We had to agree on terms, but there was more or less a handshake agreement. That happened after I left redevelopment, but we got it started. The other one that was very, very interesting was what is now the Goshen Brewing Company. Mayor Kaufman, was very interested in having a microbrewery in town, and that one fit the bill. Microbreweries need very, very, very tall ceilings for the vats that they brew in, and this particular building had extremely tall ceilings. Obviously, well, not obviously, I was not able to get Goshen Brewing Company to come in, but we did work with Matt Anthony's brewing company out of Fort Wayne, and that was just a fun experience, and learned a lot about brewing and stuff. It didn't come to fruition with them, but fortunately that is now a microbrewery, and it is that's a real draw for our community. If you go in there, you're going to find that easily 40–50% of the people there have traveled a distance to come and visit that. And then with the music that they're doing, they just draw. It's a social center. It's for the community.
So could you imagine some of this mill race redevelopment as a kid growing up along the mill race?
No, I couldn't. It's a wonderful thing. You know, most communities that you go to in Indiana and across the nation, small communities, and you look around and you're going to see the fast food franchises and this, that, and the other, and then you can go 100 miles away into a similar size community. They're going to look just like the other community. Goshen's not like that. We're very unique. We have, for years, Goshen College on the south side of town. It's a wonderful employer, but we get a lot of Goshen College graduates that stay in the area. So we have that influx of college-educated people, many of whom are starting businesses and stuff. So we get that vibrancy that comes out of Goshen College. So that has been a difference in the community for a long time. We've had the cooperation between the government and business that Alan Kaufman extended into the school systems and other places where we cooperate to try to improve our community. But now we have, and then obviously the mill race, when it generated power, was a magnet to draw companies into the area. But now as a primary recreational area, and also that it's tied to the the Pumpkin Vine Trail, now we've got a very, very unique recreational area in our community, and that people know about us. You know, they think of Goshen, and one of the first things they're going to think of is the Maple City bike path system. So, and that's just great. People that move to Elkhart County because of work have a lot of choices as to where to live. And there are a lot of people that once they get to Goshen and look around, they don't look any further. This is where they want to live. And that speaks, it's just wonderful for our community to have the influx of and these are people that recognize what they like to see here, and when they settle, they start in turn working to make this even a better community.
So is that kind of theme or focus on quality of life something that you remember emerging at a particular time, or is it just something that evolved out of the intuitive sense of what needed to happen here?
You know, there were two TV shows, Seinfeld and, I can't remember the other one now. They always ended up in a coffee shop all the time. It was Three Men, Three Women. What?
Friends.
Friends, yes. Those two shows started to teach people about living in a city again. I mean, it was all suburbs. Now, obviously, those are bigger communities. I think both were New York. But people got that, those people got on bicycles. They walked. They had a corner coffee shop that they went to. All the amenities that are in a downtown. And people started to want that. And Goshen started to provide that. So the Electric Brew, when it was on Main Street, was something huge in this community. It was the first place where younger people could go and gather, and they had music at night, and the place was full. My son learned to play guitar, and his teacher had him in there within 2 months playing at the Electric Brew, back when the performers are sitting this close to the audience because the place was so small. And that's how he learned to play. It was just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And from that, other younger people looked at it and said, there's places that I can do that too, and that they want to. And now I hear with younger people, there's like, there is a real interest in going to work if they can get a job at Goshen Brewing Company, or our co-op, the farmers, not the farmers, but the well, it's a co-op, the market that's on South Main Street, the Electric Brew. These are prime jobs for people, and for many people, it's as they're sorting out what they want to do in life. It's not their end job, but it's some place where they are having fun, and they think it's a place that's worthwhile to spend their time in. And that's a real pull. Goshen has the community now that can sustain young people from being, there's things for them to do here, and we have the jobs. And for people like that are my age, one of the things that we want to see, if possible, can our children come back here and live? My youngest son lived in New Orleans forever and a day, but he and his wife now live in Goshen, and they have jobs here and enjoy this. I don't know if they're going to stay here forever, but it is just wonderful to be able to have them.
So as the downtown was redeveloping, were there other things that happened during your term as mayor that stood out to you as significant?
Well, yes. We had, because of all the industry in Elkhart County and in Goshen, you would have times when, we're in one now, where businesses are expanding, and they're expanding so large that the work supply, the number of laborers, can't keep up. And we were getting quite an influx of Latinos coming into our community to take those jobs. And it was causing problems within the community. These are first-generation Latinos. Their culture is still very, very strong from the country that they came from. Goshen was a community that did not have large minority populations. We didn't have small minority populations. I mean, we were basically a white community. And so there was misunderstandings and whatever. It wasn't working out well. We were having problems. And it was extremely frustrating to me. And one day I pick up the paper, which was it's a free paper that used to be delivered, or still is delivered, to your front porch. And they had it was called Speak Out. It was you could call them anonymously, leave your comments over the phone, and they put them on record. It was something that many, many, many people in the community did not like because of the anonymity. People could make very nasty statements, and there was no name attached to it. This happened. Somebody took on the Latino community, and obviously, well, not obviously, but he didn't call it the Latino community, and was saying just terrible, nasty things. And I was pretty upset about that. And it happened to be the next day I was to speak with the Ministerial Association. Went in and talked to them and did my usual spiel about what's happening in Goshen and this, that, and keep them up to date. At the end, they said, well, what can we do as ministers to help in the community? And I said, well, we've got a problem that needs a solution. It needs more, it's not a single solution, but it needs work. And the fact that our community is not handling the influx of Latino minority population well at all. And talked to them about that article, many of whom, or that comment, and many of whom had seen that. And very quickly, a couple of ministers said, I'm so glad that you mentioned this. Something needs to be done in the community. And I said, and you guys have offered, I don't know if there's things that you can do from the pulpit about talking about how we need to be communicating, cooperating, whatever the appropriate things that we could be doing from your standpoint. Unbeknownst to me, Goshen News covers these. So there is a reporter in the background that I didn't see, and I was more frank than I probably would have been. I'd have been more guarded if I knew the media was there. And thank goodness I didn't, because the article that they put in the newspaper, front page, about mayor's comments on the Latino community, really got things started. And people, nobody was talking about it. They realized that there was a concern, and it was just sitting there without anything being done. And from that, things got started. Particularly, it was seen that there just had to be more opportunities for people to learn the English language, and that was worked on very quickly. It wasn't terribly long after that that the Ku Klux Klan decided that they would come to Goshen and let people know what they thought about the Mexicans. And obviously this is extremely upsetting in our community. We took the advice of the state police, who the Ku Klux Klan was having a little bit of a revival in Indiana at the time. They were having more of these meetings. I wouldn't say they were growing larger, but they got a lot of press, and it isn't the kind of thing that you wanted your community to have to go through. State police said, have an alternative event, have it far away from your downtown, and make it a type of event where the responsible people in the community are going to this, and they are not going to go downtown and watch the sideshow that's going to be presented down there. We had one in Shanklin Park. A lot of people came. There were community leaders who would come down for 15 minutes just to be seen, so people knew that they were there, where they supported, and would leave, and that was fine. Went on most of the day. The Ku Klux Klanners came. There were a group of people that were protesting them, and there were words, and it was exactly what the Ku Klux Klan wants. So there was that story, but there was also the story about what happened with this event. And this event then morphed into the ethnic festivals that we had, and was the impetus for the Human Relations Committee that we got formed in Goshen.
Are there other pieces of that, kind of these cultural transitions that you had to help navigate as mayor? Going back to knowing Goshen's history as a sundown town, and
oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Goshen was a sundown town. We've acknowledged that, which we should. I mean, they were. That issue goes back. I had heard. Growing up, I did not know that Goshen was a sundown town, and it was still being enforced to a degree. There certainly were no blacks, very, very few blacks that lived in Goshen at the time. There were a lot of unfortunate things that were happening back, still up and through the 60s. The Chamber of Commerce pointed out in their advertising that they would give to new companies that we had a virtually zero Negro population. I mean, that just kind of sat there by itself, but I mean, there's a reason that they were saying that. Yeah, we weren't the most welcoming community. When I got in as clerk treasurer, I was the custodian of the minutes, council minutes, and all the ordinances. Those were handwritten, obviously, back when we got started, and I took it upon myself as a project, because the urban legend, this part of the legend, was that there was actually a law on the books. And I wanted to find out if that was true. Went back and looked through all that stuff, and no, thank goodness the Goshen hadn't codified it as a formal law in Goshen, which I believe happened in some communities. But so that's a small thing that was a positive thing to know. But the fact that we were a sundown community, there's just no escaping that. However, that really, during the time that I was mayor, the sundown community wasn't an issue. It hadn't been brought up by local people. And in effect, I mean, we were no longer a sundown community. That was basically being enforced by hotel owners who would not allow blacks to stay in hotels. And there would be the police department explaining to people that it might be the good thing to do is to leave. So it's not a good part of our history. It certainly isn't. But Goshen today isn't Goshen in the 1960s at all. And I think the Latino community in particular would say that they've been made very, very welcome in this community. And I think much more so. Well, as an example, when Jeremy Stutzman ran for mayor, I was at the meeting when Latino leaders came in and they're talking to Jeremy because they were determining whether they wanted to support him. And the very first question was, are you going to keep the same police chief? And I'm thinking, oh no, there's a problem here. And no, they said, we want the same police chief. That man has just done wonders in our community, and we'd like to see a commitment that he would stay. I don't think that happens in many communities. I don't know. At least it doesn't here, and I'm thankful for that.
So some of the awareness from your experience then as mayor and as an adult, how has that reflected maybe your experience or perceptions as a child growing up here? Were you aware of some of these attitudes or histories of Goshen then?
No. Well, blissfully, remember one kid who had come from Cuba that I went to school with, and that was about it as far as diversity the whole time from grade school clear through high school. I remember down on the mill race, walking that, and came up to an older gentleman, a black gentleman who was fishing, and he said, talked to him a little bit, and he said, do you live nearby here? Which I did, and he asked me, he said, could you bring me some water? He said, if you've got an old Coke bottle that you could just put water in. I said, okay. It was about 3 blocks to get back home. Went home. My mother wanted to know what I was doing. I said, well, somebody that was fishing needed some water. Took it back to him. It's the first time I had an interaction with a black person. And by that time I was, I don't know, pushing high school age, and didn't again until I was in college. So this was a pretty lily white community run by old men, and thank goodness that's not the case anymore.
So are there aspects of Goshen that have contributed to being welcoming overall?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Goshen College and their attitudes and the service attitude that they have and that global outreach attitude that they have, those students that are going on SST and learning, and those professors, that was a big change with the professors at Goshen College that got out of Indiana and actually were in third world countries and had those experiences, and it changed them. So that's certainly a huge thing, but it's just not Goshen College and the Mennonite churches. There's a strong church base here in Goshen. Yeah, the influence, and I'll say selfish, that isn't quite the right word, but from the owners of industry in this community, they depend upon a good workforce. And part of our good workforce now is the Latino community. And that Latino community has to feel safe within this community. It has to feel welcome within this community. So for those owners, it's in their own best interest to be supportive of things that work to so that we have, the Latino community and the rest of the community working together. And a perfect example of that was when ICE was going to be building this detention center. We never quite sure what that thing was going to be, a full prison, detention center, whatever. It didn't sound good to very many people. It had a few jobs. You took a look, and I actually myself did research on the company that was coming in, which had a terrible record in the states and the communities that it had been in as far as how they treated their own workers, let alone the people that were being detained there. Jeremy Stutzman and others, I'm sure, worked with the business community and about the terrible message that this would send to the workforce in Elkhart County. And those business leaders stood up and got a hold of the power structure in Elkhart County government and explained to them that this isn't needed, and there was a stop put to it very quickly. Now, I said that's selfish. I don't want to cast aspersions on those people. Those owners very much could have done that out of a conviction, and it was the right thing to do. And I'll just backtrack my other statements. That I'm sure that's what they did. These are informed people that want to have a good community, and I'm sure they did it from that standpoint.
So going back to your time as mayor, are there other things that you want to touch on, or any other things that you might want to touch on as part of that history?
Well, a little bit on the transportation side, one of the things that's a real challenge for Goshen is that we've got State Road 119, State Road 4, and 33 that come through this community. You have a major river that cuts through this community. You have a major canal that cuts through this community. We have all these natural barriers to a good transportation system for streets. And it is very difficult and we're going to be facing this in the future as we continue to grow, because this is a growing community. Just another historical note, the Chiswick administration had a plan to fill in the mill race and make that a street. So we'd have another major thoroughfare that would cut through north and south in this community. I think that one lasted maybe about 10 minutes until the community told them that, no, you absolutely are not going to be doing something like that. And thank goodness that was nipped in the bud. But there are problems here, but we work on them. The boards and commissions that we have in Goshen, in many communities, you're paid a decent amount of money to sit on a board or commission. In Goshen, I believe the Board of Works those members get a little bit of money, but they meet every single week, so it's a lot of time. There's no other positions that I know of, and I would guess we're up to maybe 20 or 25 board and commissions. People agree to be on these boards and commissions because they know that there's work being done there that improves our community. The Shade Tree Committee, in working to have more trees in this community, and now we have this very, very lofty but hopefully doable goal of increasing our tree coverage in Goshen by a certain date, a tremendous increase in that. So that very, very good work is done, and pretty quietly by a lot of people in this community. And we worried, it was during my administration, we were worrying because many of our local businesses were being bought out, and there were companies whose headquarters were 3 states away. What is the commitment going to be with those people that come in to be supportive of our community? Are they going to push for their foremen and their other factory or their employees and management to take part in the community? Or are they going to stand aloof over here on the side? And if we would have lost that base of people to help, it would not have worked well in our community. And thank goodness it's stayed that way. They don't have, you can find people that are willing to serve on these boards and commissions. And some of them are tough. Plan commission's tough. You get in some of those meetings and that could be, very well be your neighbor or your parent's neighbor who's extremely upset with something that's happening. And those are not nice things to happen. These are not without controversy. I remember one of the biggest negatives during my administration was that we resurrected the tree board. We didn't have any group that was really looking at our tree cover. We put that in place, and unfortunately, at least from my standpoint, there was a member that was appointed by the council who hated the idea of a tree board, got himself on there and saw what he could do to destroy that board, and was being very successful at it. You know, a lot of people in Goshen, our background, Brethren Mennonite, we're not very controversial. We're not stick it in your face. We look for consensus. This man wasn't looking for consensus, and he just took people by the storm. I had to be very ham-handed in that situation. I just dissolved that board. We changed the name of it 2 months later, passed it again, talked with the council about not putting this person on, and then we got a new start and got going. So there's some bumps along the way in the community.
But would you say civic engagement exists at a higher level in Goshen than in other places?
No. And from this standpoint, because it's now just a week or so from an election in Goshen, and I believe, I haven't run the numbers yet, but it's something like 25% of our community got out and voted. Probably 5% of the Latino community got out and voted. Some people say, well, people are satisfied with what's happening in Goshen, so they don't bother to vote. There wasn't a mayor's race this time, so that's going to cut down on the vote. I don't know, it's a civic responsibility. Part of being a citizen is to take part in elections. And if you feel things are going the right way, why wouldn't you go out and support the people that are doing that for you? Because it isn't, I mean, this was an extremely small election. If a faction gets together in Goshen and decides that they want to be a major part, and perhaps it's a faction that may not have the community's interests as a whole as their best interest, they can do that. I was going door to door and making phone calls. We had talking to people who were saying, well, I don't think I'm going to go vote. I didn't pay attention, this and that. And I said, well, that's unfortunate because we have Goshen High School students that are working. And they were excited about coming. They get off school. It's an excused absence. And the state legislature understands that being part of an election is a good thing for students to have as part of their background. They're calling people, they're knocking door to door, they're enthused about being part of this, and they're talking to people that say, no, I don't think I need to vote this time. And what kind of a message are we sending to the youth of our community that voting is not something that is really to be valued? So from that standpoint, I don't think that have high levels of civic. Now there's very, 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 very many more examples of where we do, but this is a major one, and there's just a problem here. I don't understand it, and it bothers me. And I know it bothers Mayor Stutzman. He's talked about it in the past. Alan Kaufman and I had a meeting yesterday where we talked about this. And this isn't one that, I mean, the result, it isn't one where normally problems in the community, all sorts of stakeholders come in and they work together and this, that, and the other. This tends to be one, I don't know who the other stakeholders would be on this. I don't know that they see it as a problem like myself, Alan Kaufman, and Jeremy Stutzman see it as a problem. I have told the Latino community, you may be satisfied in what's happening, and you don't feel that you have to vote. I said, how terrible is it going to be that we elect some people we have people on the council or people, the mayor, who would have welcomed the ICE facility into our community. And now you realize what happens when you have elected officials. And certainly that ICE facility would not have been in the Latino community's best interest, or as I believe, the whole community's best interest. Now you're going to be active, and you'll turn it around. Why wait? Why wait and have to go through that sort of a situation?
So, in your own journey, in your own story, as mayor, you eventually decided to step down or to end your term as mayor. Mm-hmm. How did that transition unfold for you?
Well, I had an undiagnosed thyroid problem, and that causes, so I wasn't getting enough thyroid into my system. It makes you extremely tired. There's a lot of, nothing that's terrible that's happening to you, horrible pain or this, that, and the other. That's why it doesn't get diagnosed, but just a lot of things that just don't feel good. And I took it on as stress, that's what was happening. And I knew that I did not want to run for a fourth term. And I was starting already to look, so what's the future going to be? My sons were getting ready to go to college. Goshen pays its mayor well, doesn't pay its mayor very well. And at the time, Frank O'Bannon had just got elected mayor. The head of the toll road was going to jail. There was an interim person in there. And so I applied for that position. I knew Governor O'Bannon a bit, and it is a governor's appointment, and I was lucky enough to get that position. And so I resigned as mayor midterm, and that's when Alan Kaufman was put in. The process is precinct committeemen of the Democratic Party get together and elect him. And there was a race that year, during that meeting. Patty Morgan, a council member, also ran. Alan was successful. I moved up to the toll road and stayed there until Mitch Daniels became governor and decided he wanted to sell the toll road. He put his own person in charge, which was fine. Certainly understood that. I was kept on and stayed up there until the sale went through, and that's when I came back and worked for Alan Kaufman in redevelopment.
And then you were also involved in Shipshewana for a bit?
Yes, yeah. The opportunity came available to go up to Shipshewana. The Goshen, that was a period of time when the state had, because of some property tax changes, had really limited the revenue to city government. Alan Kaufman was looking for any way he could to find efficiencies and save money for large projects, and quickly they were going to put 3 departments together. He wanted me to run that. There were members on the council that didn't seem that fit to support that. So I told him, well, your idea is good. Go find somebody the council feels comfortable with. And I applied the next day to the Shipshewana town manager's job, and within a week I was up there working. Wonderful place to work. Town of 500 people that will have upwards to 10,000 people on a good day because of the flea market. Just great people to work with. I enjoyed that tremendously. I've been involved in trails my whole political career. I get up there and they're still trying to do the last portion into Shipshewana, and it was controversial with many of the people that lived next to it. So I got back in a wonderful thing of trails, and I knew these people would like it, but we've got to get over the hump. So we had to go through that controversy again, and got it done and got that part finished. And by that time, I was starting to figure out how I could wind down my career, and ended up retiring from that. And 4 months later, I was hiking the Appalachian Trail.
What led you to take that step?
There's a author, his last name's Bryson, I can't remember the
Bill
first.
Bryson.
Yeah, wrote a book that I had read back, well, when it first came out, about his adventures hiking the Appalachian Trail, 2,200 mile trail that goes from Georgia to Maine. And I was captivated by that, and I always thought I'd like to try it. I was sitting in a doctor's office one day reading a magazine, and it talked about the new lightweight equipment that are allowing old people to hike. Very, very lightweight equipment. So you're not, normally a hiker will have 40 pounds or more on their back, and when you put that amount on your back, you're wearing great big huge hiking shoes that weigh several pounds that you have to lift every step you take. I thought, read that, and I go, I can do this if I can get my pack weight down. So I ended up hiking in running shoes with a 20-pound pack. I had hurt my back and been in rehab right up to that point in time, and decided that I'd go ahead with the hike anyway, just to see if I was going to enjoy it and see if it could, how far I could get, and then really make a go at it the next year. The hiking was the best thing you could do for your back. I got, when I got 500 miles, realized my back's fine. Because I'm not carrying all this weight and all this, my body isn't deteriorating like these 22-year-old kids who that 40-pound, and in some cases I saw people with 80-pound backpacks going up mountains and down, who are just, they're falling apart. Had no blisters. I'm in better shape than most of these kids, and I can walk. By that time, I'd walked myself into a physical shape that I could walk the 25 miles a day that they were walking. And I realized I could do it, and I thought, oh my God, it's going to take the X number of more months, and if, barring an injury, I can do this whole thing. I'm not so sure I want to. My son was in college, I missed my wife, and so I called a stop to it. 2 years ago, I went back. I was going to hike another significant portion of it, did another 100 miles, and I was making some errors. I got dehydrated. I was not being too smart. I'm now, that time I'm pushing 70 years old, and sometimes your decisions aren't too good. So my wife has been told if I head that direction again, she's to take a gun and shoot me before I can get up there.
So you did it on your own?
Yeah, well, that's most people that hike the Appalachian Trail do it by themselves. You hook up with people as far as on a day-to-day basis. As you're hiking, you'll run into a hiker and you'll hike with them for several miles. Mm-hmm. But there's probably a third of the people are women. Most of those women hike by themselves. A good portion of people are 62 and over. Mm-hmm. That are hiking. It's, you get your Social Security, and this is a way of, and that's why I did it, was to get myself in the best shape I could possibly be for my retirement as part of it. A lot of kids that are 22 years old that didn't get a job out of college, and they're doing this because it's cheap. So you get the 62-year-olds and the 22-year-olds, and for the first month or so, the 22-year-olds don't want to talk to you. You're just, why are these old people out here? Look at this old, you're plodding along, and and telling stories about when you were a kid, and they don't have any interest in that. After about a month, they've got pain, they're sore, they realize that you're still there, you're hiking every bit as much as they are, and all of a sudden it all comes together. And that's what keeps a lot of, and that's what I missed about leaving, is that you get to know some people extremely well. I'm fairly introverted, and for whatever, they've done studies on this, the Appalachian Trail attracts introverts. And you end up coming out of your shell a little bit with these strangers, but you have to depend on each other for safety and this, that, and the other. So it's a wonderful experience. Anybody that's, I've talked to a lot of people, try it. It's a lot of fun.
Did you find yourself reflecting much on
Oh,
your
yes.
time here? I know coming back to Goshen and this question of being in this position of mayor and what your legacy might be. What were some of the reflections in that regard?
Well, yeah, on the Appalachian Trail, you're certainly reflecting. You're hiking 8 to 10 hours a day, and a lot of that's by yourself, and it's just beautiful. But it's step, 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 and you start thinking of things. For me, my routine, I had 3 Appalachian folk songs I knew that I would sing. Once everything warmed up and I'm feeling good, I'd sing my 3 songs. And that was a lot of fun. And then I'd start thinking, oh, I wrote a book in my head, and this, that, and the other while I was doing this. But I also thought back on the stuff that was fun, the stuff I wish I had done different. Yeah, in retirement, you do take a look back at your, the things that you've done with your family and with your work. Legacy seems such a, presidents have legacies, governors have legacies. I kind of like to maybe be remembered as the person that had something to do with getting the bike path started in this community. But I'll be remembered how people remember me. I'm not interested in trying to formulate that, trying to influence what that's going to be like. I don't know. Mayor it was a wonderful job, the best job I ever had. You get a lot of respect from people. It's wonderful, but it is the mayor. I mean, you're not president, you're not a congressman, this or that. You're just a person that's trying to do some good things for your community, and if I did that, I'm happy.
Is there anything else you would like to reflect on here or touch on before we wrap up?
Well, just simply is I appreciate the opportunity. We'd gotten together for a couple days ago to talk about this. This helps me, a lot of good memories get popped up by going through this process. And I've found through time when people have asked me to do this and asked me to do that, and to help on this and help on that. Certainly, there's a lot of satisfaction in being able to do that, but I always get more from it, I feel, than what I put into it. There's a tremendous amount of good feedback from doing things like this.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and do this interview.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.